Am I racist? That's the question the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh looks to answer in his new documentary. If you're ready to do the work, stick around and we'll see if we can get a conversation started. See you on the other side. If you're not familiar with Matt Walsh, that might mean you're not terminally online, which is fine. Walsh is part of Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire crew and was responsible for last year's What is a Woman documentary. With Am I Racist?, Walsh uses the same formula but goes further, this time going undercover, as he goes on a journey to rid himself of his whiteness and become a better anti-racist ally. Before jumping into the movie, I think it's important to lay out that while this is set up as a documentary, Walsh is not being genuine on his trip here. Walsh is 100% against all of this, but by doing the interviews and becoming a part of the various workshops as if he's an ally himself, he gives us an in-depth view of the inner workings of these people. Some have said it's a Borat-style mockumentary, but I disagree a bit. Walsh is much more subtle. He deadpans his way through all of it, never breaking character, allowing the people being interviewed to make asses out of themselves by giving their unvarnished opinions to someone they see as one of them. It comes off more of a hidden camera thing because of that. Am I Racist begins with Walsh sitting in a diner enjoying his breakfast, thinking about how race has become such a huge issue in society. Even going so far as to say,
growing up in the 90s, I never thought much about race. Sure, you noticed, but never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
When a waitress comes over to ask him if he'd like some more coffee and how he likes it. When he begins to answer, he realizes she happens to be black, and he hesitates, worrying that saying black will upset her and make him seem racist. This hesitation and worry bother him, and he decides he needs to become an anti-racist himself. So he talks to Kate Slater, a self-described anti-racist scholar practitioner and facilitator based in New England, where he gets his first taste of the subject. His next stop is a wildly progressive bookstore in Colorado where he seeks help in finding some reading materials to help on his journey. While there, he runs across a particularly difficult book to discuss, which comes back as a subject of the after-credit scene, so be sure to stick around for that. It's only after going to his first workshop where the other participants realize who he is does he decide that he might need a disguise. So he puts on some skinny jeans, some gold-rimmed glasses, and a wig complete with a man bun, and the journey really begins. And sure enough, this is almost all it takes to allow him to slide unnoticed in and out of the various diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops and interviews. 3 of the scenes are particularly important. The first is the interview with Kate Slater. Another is a luncheon hosted by Syra Rao and Regina Jackson. And the jewel in the crown is an interview with the author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo. I'm going to go into some detail about these 3 after we finish with the plot. Walsh also seeks out some input from some would-be racist, but even when he shows up at a roadside biker bar, people just refuse to be racist. In the process, he did manage to have a conversation with a Haitian immigrant who'd been in the US since 1971 who had no interest in talking about race and said for him it never came up and that the US had been wonderful to him. Near the end of the movie, Matt decided he was ready to finally spread the anti-racist word. And since he'd gone online and gotten his own DEI certification card earlier in the movie, something he was overly proud to let everyone know every time he met them, he set up his own workshop to tell white people how to be more like him. The darkest part of this scene was his producer, Ben, wheeling out Matt's Uncle Frank, who had been described earlier in the movie as being racist and who Matt had not confronted. After being wheeled out, Matt yelled at him for being racist at some family gathering years ago. He then invited people in the group to tell Frank what they thought of him. The scariest thing was several did yell at him, cursing him violently simply because they'd been told to do so. By step 9 of his program, he'd gotten most of the remaining participants to consider willingly flogging themselves with Indiana Jones-style bullwhips, which he was helpfully handing out to them. It was at this point that he was pushed over the edge and decided that it might all just be a big scam designed to get people to hate each other and to make money for the people pushing the division, essentially causing the disease and then selling the cure. And you can see this clear as day in the 3 scenes I'd mentioned earlier. In the first one with Kate Slater, Walsh manages to twist her into a knot by just asking her a few simple questions about her own beliefs. And keep in mind, Walsh does this while seeming like an ally, so at no point are anyone's defenses up because he's not being combative. His confusion, while real, gets them to try and explain their beliefs, and when they can't, his confusion is even funnier. In this case, the topic is about costumes. Slater mentions that her own young daughter gravitates toward white Disney princesses despite her own work as an activist. Matt mentions that his young daughter likes Moana, and Slater thinks that's great, until Matt suggests it actually poses a problem, because what is he supposed to do if she wants to dress up like Moana for Halloween? Surely it would be problematic to go and get her a native Polynesian costume for his little white girl. Slater agrees it's an issue and that she wouldn't do it. And then Walsh sets the hook and says that's the real issue. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. On the one hand, a white child that doesn't gravitate toward non-white characters can be seen as racist, but identifying with them so much that you want to emulate them can be seen as cultural appropriation, which is also racist. Slater is left mumbling some word salad and Matt's point is made. The luncheon with Syra Rao and Regina Jackson is particularly tough to watch. For those not familiar with either of these two pieces of work, I'd suggest you go and look them up. They are...
Wow.
Rao and Jackson run Race to Dinner, which is a meal where white women with too much money and too much guilt pay them to berate them over a fancy meal at one of their homes for being vile racists directly to their faces. Aside from the ridiculousness of Rao and Jackson's claims, the entire thing was just really hard to watch. I mean, unless you're into S&M, I guess. The white women here clearly enjoyed being told how disgusting they are, and Rao and Jackson were practically orgasmic while being openly racist towards white people while knowing they were being paid handsomely to do it. The duo may as well have just been wearing dominatrix outfits. Walsh managed to get into this thing by dressing up as one of the waiters, still complete with his ally costume on. The only interaction Walsh had here was finally not being able to control his allyship and butting into the conversation while serving meals. The best, though, was the sit-down interview with Robin DiAngelo. If you're familiar with this channel, you know I've mentioned DEI and how it's destroying the entertainment industry for the entire time I've been making videos. It's also why, unlike many in this same space, I have no faith we're about to turn a corner just because Deadpool and Wolverine wasn't openly political and didn't seem to cater to left-wing activists. The programs that are now embedded into each and every studio got there because of activists like DiAngelo, so she's been on my radar for a while now. Since I'm such a swell guy, to save you the trouble of reading her awful screed of a book, let me cliff notes this for you. DiAngelo readily admits she's racist. And since she's also progressive, well-educated, and as far as she's concerned, an all-around awesome gal, then that means everyone else must also be racist since she's better than them, especially anyone not as progressive, not as well-educated, and not nearly as nice as her. And if anyone dares disagree with her assessment, well, that only further proves her claim and shows they have white fragility.
Boom, bitch!
In short, it's a shell game with no ball underneath them. You lose every possible way, and the only one who wins is her, since she's selling you the perpetual tools to do the work. So anyway, during the uncomfortable conversation, DiAngelo mentions an idiotic belief that smiling at a black person can be seen as racist because, in her opinion, white people will often do this instinctively to show they're not racist. Walsh sees the opening and asks her to roleplay that with him like she may do in one of her workshops. He says he'll pretend to be a black colleague of hers. It went something like this, but keep in mind I'm paraphrasing here. Robin, earlier today when you passed me in the hall, you made what I thought was a big deal of smiling at me. This bothered me, and I thought it was racist, and I'm thinking about going to HR to report it. She said, well, Matt, I'm sorry I did that, and I hear your complaint. I'll try and do better, and I hope you can forgive me. He then says, okay, well, let's move on to the next day. Robin, yesterday we talked about you overly smiling at me and how that was an issue for me. And today when we walked by each other in the hallway, you didn't smile at all. And this made me even angrier. Now it's as if you're mad and you won't even look at me. Now, after a long pause, she says, I'm not really sure how to address that. Once again, pointing out the impossibility of ever getting any of this right, because the goal is to perpetually keep you at fault and on your heels. He then got his producer, a black man named Ben, to come on camera so that he and DiAngelo could apologize directly to him as white people. Matt apologized first, and then DiAngelo said, quote, "On behalf of myself and my fellow white people, I apologize. It is not you, it is us. As long as I'm standing, I will do my best to challenge it." Matt then decided to up the ante and pulled out his wallet and handed Ben $20-something as reparations. DiAngelo sat stunned by this and then said she thought it was weird, and Matt responded that he wasn't waiting for the system to change and had decided to act individually and challenged her to do the same. DiAngelo then asked Ben if he'd accept money from her, to which he responded, "I'm not going to turn down cash." And so she stood up, walked over to her purse, and pulled out $30 and handed it to Ben. The $30 gift was made even funnier because Matt had been showing a graphic on screen of how much each of the various workshops and interviews cost with these activists, and DiAngelo's cost to appear was a whopping $15,000, which Walsh then deducted the $30 from that she had given to Ben. Now, finally, I need to point out how much this movie has triggered the left. In its opening weekend at the box office, this barely funded documentary finished in the top 5, currently has a 99% positive score for verified viewers, but no score from critics, who refuse to even look at it. This is just an admission they're not actually film critics, but political activists. Hell, even guys like me that hate most modern entertainment will watch something knowing we're gonna hate it and then tell everyone how bad it is. But these clowns don't even have enough integrity to do that. They're just gonna pretend that it doesn't exist. Oh, and Walsh's co-stars in the movie? They've scattered like roaches from social media, with many of them simply shutting down their accounts days before the release. On top of that, Robin DiAngelo has released an official statement on her webpage, which might even be funnier than the movie itself. In it, she essentially claims that she was unsure about the entire interview the whole time. Feel free to stop the video to read this drivel at your leisure. But what this statement fails to answer is that if she was concerned that it might be a setup, worried that things weren't on the up and up, why'd she keep the $15,000 interview fee? And much worse, why did she embarrassingly go into her own purse and hand a man she didn't know $30? Look, the truth is, all this statement does is reinforce the notion she's just a slimy grifter who was happy to pocket the $15,000, regardless of what she claims she's now done with it. My only real complaint is that I wish Matt would have attempted to speak to more normal, random white people to make his point about the people focusing on race in America now are largely just race activists. By going into that biker bar in this case, complete with Confederate battle flags on the wall, it just felt too forced, and opponents could suggest that they were just saying what they thought the interviewer wanted to hear. That said, this is a really funny movie that makes what I think is a great point. I wholeheartedly agree with Walsh's original statement from the beginning of the movie, where he said growing up in the 90s, he never thought about race. Look, I'm a bit older than Walsh, so you can back this up to the late 70s and 80s, and it's the exact same feeling. I think this was the case with all of my fellow Gen Xers, really. We were the first full generation nationwide that grew up with desegregation. We had so little concept of what came before us because we all grew up with friends, teammates, coaches, classmates, role models, etc. of all races. We saw each other as individuals that happen to look different. We knew older people had views that didn't necessarily align with ours regarding race, but that had little impact on us because we grew up in an entirely different world than they had. If anything, it was like watching people smoke and realizing that was a behavior we didn't want to emulate. So it's been really disheartening to watch the world get pulled back decades into the past to now begin non-stop race talk, all but erasing the gains our entire generation had made. As Walsh points out in the movie, the only people that really seem to benefit from this are the very DEI race hucksters pushing this on everyone. They're causing the disease and then selling us the cure. Until next time, thanks for watching.